easily to be able to say, for a period of time, what are we targeting? And so for us, as we think about building that backlog, one of the things we're going to do is go through each of our objects. And actually, let me go through. I'm actually going to pick another one here. And as teams go in, what they're going to do, and I'm going to pick this intelligence assistant chatbot, we're going to take a feature and we're going to start as a team, starting to break it down, start understanding it. We're going to learn about it from the information that's on it. But then we're going to go through and we're going to start adding extra data. First things first, we're going to add stories. These stories are going to be built, can be built in Jira Line or Jira. And I'll show you a little bit about that at the end too. We're going to be able to go through and actually write those out. What are the things we think we need to do that? Along the way, we can also review and determine what acceptance criteria is here. Jira Line uses a really neat ability to set individual acceptance criteria that a product manager can fail or pass to say, hey, when I step back and I say, is this feature done? I can determine not just based on the stories being done. If it's done, I can actually use my own acceptance criteria to say what's good, right and what's not right. And then through planning, what I'm going to do, a couple of things we ask teams to do typically is say, hey, identify risks. Are there any risks that you have? Maybe new software from vendor is being delayed. So we've created a risk that's going to be following what we consider the Rome methodology. I'll show you a little bit about that in a moment. We also may identify dependencies. And dependencies is one of those things where we could take a whole nother session on that. It is probably one of the most powerful components of Align. As someone who's been a coach and scrum master and RTE in my past lives, one of the biggest things I'll say is that the Achilles heel of agility is dependencies. And, doing an issue item link between teams just doesn't cut it because it really needs to be a handshake agreement. And so with Jira Line, we treat it as such. The object itself is something that goes through a workflow of not committed to completed. And so we get to track that along the way to help ensure that dependencies don't get in our way along the journey. And then other things we may identify through this is also identifying what objectives we tie to. In this case, we're saying that, hey, this particular piece of work actually tied to two particular objectives. They tie to a program objective as well as a portfolio objective. So identifying why are we doing this work? What work is it supporting? And so by going through and adding this, going through that conversation as a team, determining what aspects are here, what's real, how much is this going to take, we can then truly actually begin planning this out. And the way that we've seen this play out the best, and if you're familiar with SAFE, you'll be familiar with this, is actually communicating a plan using something like a program board or a planning board. In this case, what we're seeing is the planning board for the mobile team for PI5. Gives us our sprints that we have in the PI. It gives us our teams that we have. And each of these boxes will represent a different type of objects. These rectangles represent the actual features. I'm from Detroit, so I call these the Chevy symbols. Those Chevy symbols represent dependencies that are being owned by that team. And then up here we have objectives and how they're progressing. Along this, I can see how are we progressing overall. And as you'd imagine, colors mean something here. We look at something in green, green is good. Red, not so good. And so as you're using this to plan, my big goal I tell teams is really come out of planning without any red and try to avoid the orange colors too, because those are both indicating that you have planning issues. And so if you're heading into planning with issues right off the bat, you're already setting yourself up in a bad spot. And one of the nice things, it's kind of faux AI, but what it does is it looks at what issues are there and it helps make a decision to say, hey, why is this in trouble? This is a great example of one that says, hey, the reason this one is red is it says some stories in a past sprint were not accepted. And so it says, oh, snap, it looks like this one's in progress and it was in sprint 16. We're in sprint 23. We can't complete that by then if that's still saying sprint 16. We've got to go and correct that. So what it does, it gives you some good indicators of why things are the way they are. And so our program board here gives us a good ability to see for teams, what have they planned? When do they want to get it done? And are there any things that are getting in our way along that journey? And as we move into execution, the program board's a great tool to be able to help us look at that as well and say, hey, are there new things that pop up along the way? Now, let's say we've established this plan. We had our goals, we broke it into a backlog. We said, hey, this is the work we're looking at. And we said, you know what? We think we can do this part. That's what we've planned out. These things on the left-hand side, we're saying we can't do those, but we can do this stuff. Awesome. Now we can get into the real thing. Everyone's get what's the famous philosopher's quote, Mike Tyson. Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Once we actually start execution, it's about inspecting and adapting along the way. It's about tracking progress and understanding. So for us, one of our best mechanisms for doing this is what I consider is our program room. I like to think about this as like the command center for a team of teams. When execution begins, the program room can be used as a great location to understand overall progress. Here we're looking at, again, PI5 from mobile program. We can see we've got 63 features, 354 stories, and over 2,200 story points that we planned this PI. From there, we can go in and understand through these kind of widgets that we have here how we're doing overall, how much time we've got left to, and then also how are we doing team by team? Because ultimately we are performing as a program, but we also want to understand, hey, is anyone kind of far behind, far ahead? Can we help support each other along the way? And along with that, we can understand how teams have loaded themselves up based on past capacity. In this case, I might be looking at Houston as a team and saying, hey, it looks like you're about 10% over of what you normally can do. What's changed in I might ask a question, what's changed in your environment that has led you to think that you can you can take on more work? And they may say, well, no, we overplanned this sprint, this PI. And as an RTA, I might say, well, let's look to maybe scale some stuff back because if nothing's changed, you might be setting yourselves up for failure at some level. So here it gives me the ability to kind of see this all in one picture. So I think about this center column, I can set up custom checklists that we can share with everybody on the program, as well as monitor overall sprint progress. I can then see, of course, the features I've planned. And again, I can get some other information as well. Misaligned stories are one of my favorite pieces here because what they do is they represent stories that belong to features or Jira epics that are not in this PI. I like to think of this as it's potentially rogue work. It's work that's going on that is not associated. So may not maybe the right work to be doing, but we should ask the question. And then, of course, here in the right-hand column, I have the ability to go through and track a number of other things that might be important. Things like action items I'm taking as a program, impediments my teams are facing, risks that have come up in their status, as well as dependencies, and as well as my objectives. Again, it's that one-stop shop to see what are all the elements having to do with my execution and how are we doing overall. Along with this, a couple other things I want to point out is going to be during our tracking. There's a couple other pages we reference things like our overall progress. This is going to be something where I can go in and actually, let me click on my progress report. I realize I left it out of my demo. Um, this is going to give me the ability to see things such as burn downs. I'll have that ability to see um, how am I doing overall. In this case, I can actually say, hey, as I complete Jira epics, how am I doing? As I actually just look at my pure story points, I can see I'm doing. And actually, overall, hey, I may have overplanned a little bit here, as well as things like my burn up, which this is test data, so ignore the odd data there. And what I really enjoy about this piece too is being able to go in and what we consider drill down, which gives me the ability to go in and for a particular group, I can say, hey, here's my mobile burn down. Let me see it by my teams. And now I can say, hey, how are all the teams that are supporting this doing? And I can get an idea of who might be in trouble, who may be ahead, where could we potentially share some of the love as we're going through this PI together. Some of the other pages we may be reviewing and some of the other things I want to call out along the way is things like risks. We talked about that. And one of the things that we may find we're using is keeping visibility of risks. And so things like a ROAM report, which is focused on the acronym of resolved, owned, accepted, and mitigated, which are statuses for a particular risk. This is where we can kind of manage those and get a better understanding of like, where are things at? Because honestly, for me as, someone who's leading a team of teams or somebody who's even a scrum master on a team, I want to understand where my risks are at. I care very much around. I love the fact that I see resolved ones, but things that are owned and things that are even accepted, I want to worry about a little bit because these are things that are potentially going to happen that we have no plan around yet. So it gives me the ability to keep up on these. I can also go in and manage dependencies as well. So as we talked about that feature and we talked about creating risks, we also created dependencies. And so here I can take a step back now and I can start looking at dependencies as an overall perspective using our dependency maps. So one of my favorite two views here is one is going to be what we consider a wheel view, or I like to call the dependency donut as it gets generated. And this is going to give you all the teams that are working on work associated or that have dependencies associated with TI5 in the mobile program. And I can see where those dependencies lie. And here, if I click on one of these, so let's say I click on the Tiger team, it's going to give me the ability to, actually, let me go, should be loading. Just be slowing down here. I'll refresh my page. That'll fix it a little bit. And actually, let me get rid of some of these other aspects here so we can bring this down a little bit. So if I go in and I select something like the Tiger team here, it's going to give me the ability to actually focus in on what is the relationship of those dependencies. Here's work that others need from Tiger. Awesome. All right, cool. This is everything someone else needs from them. Well, Tiger also needs work from others too. So here are the ones they need, and it tells me the status of those. So it's a fun view. Is it a useful view? Kinda. I think for me, I think that my most useful view, if I go back into our dependency maps, is actually going to be, wait for it. Actually, I'm just going to go back to my manage dependencies view. That'll bring up my maps. It's actually going to be my, what I like is my grid view. My grid view is really neat because what I like about this is it shows me the intersection of dependencies. It shows me who has dependencies and who do they need a lot. And so for me as someone who may be looking at an overall organization, I'm looking here for patterns. Like, do we have a lot of dependencies? Like here I see transformers needs Washington a bunch, and Cowboys needs Baltimore a bunch. There's three dependencies. Also, Baltimore needs Cowboys here, and so that one's even a more fascinating one as they need each other. That's going to be an area where what I'm doing as a program manager, someone looking at here, I can say, hey, is there an opportunity for some cross training or things like that? Because my goal here is to eliminate as many dependencies as possible. Now, some final two things I want to kind of share with you as we kind of wrap this up are going to be things around finishing off that strategy to execution mapping. So as we do that work, one of the most important things is saying, well, now how do we get back to those goals? We're doing a bunch of stuff. Is it making an impact? And for us, that's going to manifest in the form of what we consider as our strategy tree or our objectives tree. So I'm actually just going to navigate to it here because my checklist is giving me a little bit of an issue. And here, what it's going to give me the ability to do is go back and actually say, awesome, I've built myself a set of objectives that tie to my goals. How am I actually doing against those objectives? And so here, what I'm seeing is I'm seeing what I would consider uh, program objectives coming down into team objectives. And I can see overall progress as we're looking at this. If I move myself up to digital services and I look overall here, I can now start even seeing higher up in the system. Now at this point, I'm looking at what I would be considering portfolio objectives to program objectives to team objectives. And I can see how I'm doing overall. And what's neat here is I can see my key result progress, meaning how am I scoring this? But I can also see my work progress. So that let's say I'm in this guy right here, I'm become market leader. I can see that I am already kicking butt from a key results progress, and I haven't even done that much of the work. It is possible that we achieve that result and I don't have to complete all the work because in the end, it's the outcome that matters. It's not the fact that we got that work done. And so for us, being able to tie this ultimately back, we took those goals, we turned them into work, we planned that work, we executed that work, and then we updated our aspect of those goals to tie it all the way back through. We're able to see, hey, are we making the right decisions? Are we moving in the right direction? So that kind of finishes off that tree. And the last thing I wanted to show you before we kind of open it up for some Q&A here is one other thing that we look to do is part of Jira Line is that Jira Line is a counterpart to Jira in terms of it sits on top of it. Jira is the tool of choice for teams. That's where teams create their projects and their boards and they work the most efficiently and effectively in Jira. Jira Line really is designed for your team of teams, your portfolios, your enterprises, to be able to help connect all those disparate data points together. And so for us, we maintain an integration between the systems. So I'm actually just going to give you an example of what that integration looks like real quick. So when we think about Align and Jira, we will integrate to the what we would consider the Jira Epic level. So if you're using things like advanced roadmaps today, we don't necessarily, there are some testing we're doing with a potential new feature that would enable us to expand up higher into the hierarchy if you're using advanced roadmaps. But as of today, we support up to the Jira Epic. And so for us, I wanted to show you an example of what that kind of looks like. Here we have essentially, and actually let me go find here my one example. When I'm in this, I'm going to go find my Battlestar Galactica program, and I'm going to go ahead and let me get rid of my PI on here too. Basically, what we're going to show you is that when we create a connection between these, what we're going to ultimately see is we're going to see when Jira and Jira Line make that handshake, you can see here what will happen is we'll create that relationship. This external ID, that represents my item in Jira. So I have that ability to see, hey, that's my key that I have in Jira. So if I'm talking with my teams, I also have that ability as I'm looking at this particular feature to be able to go directly to that item in Jira. So if I click this button and I come down, it's going to open up Jira for me. And what's really nice is that we have the ability to create a web link so that if I am in Jira and I want to go back here, I can also go back and, as you imagine, go back into Jira Line and pop that item open. We'll send some information, we'll share information back and forth. It's bidirectional syncing. And one thing I wanted to show you here before we open it up for a little Q&A is one of my favorite pieces of our syncing is that one of the biggest things that we talk about strategy execution is that when teams are working, one of the things that they struggle with is that ability to understand like the purpose of what they're doing. Because honestly, teams might come up with a better solution than what is being proposed to them if they know what's going on. So within Jira Line, if you're familiar with it, we have this thing called a Y button. And in Jira Line, it's neat because if I click on that Y button, it's going to give me some information. It's going to give me things such as the feature that I'm tied to, the epic that I'm tied to, if there's any strategic themes, if I've used WizGIF, or if I have success measures applied here. Lots of information on how this is tying up. And then when I'm talking about and that's great, but if my teams are in Jira Line, they can't get the benefit from that. Well, the cool thing is that by integrating Jira and Jira Line, we can enable that information to be sent down. And so if I come back into this example here, you'll notice here at the very top of this Jira epic, I've got some information that's been sent down from Jira Line. In this case, I've been able to see my feature that I've sent down, my epic that I've sent down, my strategic theme. I can see information on how I've scored this from a prioritization technique. I can also see things like success criteria or my business case. So giving me information as a team member to say, hey, this is why we're doing this. So I can kind of get that greater picture of like, wow, that we're actually trying to move this ball forward. That's pretty cool. So that was a lot. That was a lot in one demo. And so I want to say thank you all for giving me the chance to come over and just give you that taste, that sneak peek here. I will say that we've got a little bit of time, I think, for some Q&A. So happy to answer any questions for you here and that may have popped up during this demo. And then, of course, we'll have some opportunities for you to ask me questions outside of this as well. So open it up for questions.
And for your questions, if you are able to use audio, just go off mute and say something, and otherwise use chat.
I'll bring up the chat too, so that way I can see. How do you avoid duplication between Jira and Jira Line? Awesome question. So one of the biggest things that we'll end up doing there is we do pivot off of that Jira key. So that becomes an important thing for us. So we can integrate across multiple instances, of course, but the way we look at data is that a particular Jira project within a Jira instance can be tied to a particular team of teams. And so for us, we use that Jira key as that kind of indicator of what work is where. And even if you migrate that, let's say you move an issue from one project to another, we follow that along the pathway. And all of a sudden you'll see that key update in Jira Line so that we know this is being moved here. This is where its new home is. Awesome. What else? What other questions? I hope that helped. I hope that answered that question.
I'll pop in with a question here. Can you give
Yeah.
some examples of some of those guardrails, some of those things that Jira Align
Ooh.
not think are valid things to do? What is it going to stop me from doing?
So I would say it's not one of those things where it's going to stop you from doing, but one of the biggest things that I'll say from my experience working with customers is the construct of time. So
Mhm.
a lot of times organizations they'll work in long periods of time, like years or something like that place about getting a project done, or a project spins up and is just like it lives the life of the project and the project's done. The way Jira Line looks at those two elements is that, well, one of the big things for us is important is stable teams, or at least some construct of that team and team of teams. You can see how important that is as we think about things like even how the data is organized, and that's by team versus project. And for us too, time, when we look at an element like, let me go back in over here. If I come over and I look at something like my backlog and I look at something like a feature, one of the things you're going to notice is that ability to select that period of time on there. So if I come down, I'm going to see a PI. And so this is a great example of one where a feature for us lives in a PI. It doesn't live across 7 PIs. And that's living into one of those principles of when we're breaking down work, whatever you set as that increment of a PI or that time frame, work should be able to be completed in that. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest learning steps that when we work with organizations is that they have to think about, how do I get stuff done in smaller chunks?
Mhm.
And teams work in small chunks, or the smallest chunk. We then move up in the teams of teams. We say, yeah, it shouldn't be 2 weeks and then a year. It should probably be something a little bit smaller in between. So I would say those are the biggest things that we work with customers to kind of better get into. If they don't have that construct already, they struggle with it.
Makes sense.
Question in the Q&A tab, which I wasn't even aware that it was
Ooh,
from Constantine. I don't know. Can you see it yourself, Mark? Or
I'm looking to see right now. I don't see a questions tab.
okay, if you, well, I'll read it to you. It's from Constantine, who asks, "What Atlassian products do you need implemented before purchasing and trying to integrate Jira Align?"
Great question. So really, honestly, it's just Jira. Jira, actually, we will integrate Jira, we'll integrate with Trello, and we'll integrate with products like Azure DevOps. So let's say you have that installed in your ecosystem, we technically can integrate with all three of those products. So as long as you have a Jira system set up, we connect up through it. Just like many other products that sit on top of Jira, just like many of the marketplace apps. And so we'll integrate in and you're set to go at that point. And for us, the one thing I will say is that as you bring that in, Jira Line will sit on top and will be a much smaller user base than your Jira group, so it won't be a one-to-one aspect there. And so as you think about that, have yourself established with a teaming platform, and then start bringing in Jira Line and say, all right, how do we start elaborating on that teaming platform? How do we start thinking about this in higher level teams?
Thanks, Mark. The
Yeah.
next question is also from Constantine. Will Atlassian be offering a separate certification for using and administering
Ooh.
Jira Align? Definitely my expectation.
So I believe there is some work afoot for that. I know I was involved with some work with one of our partners who has been working on some certification material around it. So I imagine that will be around. I do think I believe there's a pro skills badge that's out there that you can get around Jira Line. But I know stuff has been in the works, so we'll see. The one thing I'll say is I know as the platform continues to evolve and there's some changes happening, they're determining whether or not do they put a certification out there now and then the platform slightly evolves, or do they wait and let it kind of evolve over the next year, then put one out? So I would say it's coming soon.
Yeah, there's the Pro Skills badge, which is for users,
Yep.
and there's a certification. It's not technically a certification. There's a fancy name they use for it, but it's for your partners, official Atlassian partners for
Yep.
your Align, and the individual employees, the partners can get that certification, whatever it is. It's more about implementing it and
Yep.
administering it. So I don't think you can get it if you're not a partner, I think.
At this point, I know unless you're a partner, you can't take that, but there are conversations afoot, I believe, of how that could evolve into something else. But yep, you're exactly like Dan. That was exact like going through like the course that you went through, and if others have been through that kind of thing, that's one of those step ways into getting that kind of a partner certification or that implementation certification.
Thank you. We've got another question from Jeff
here.
CTL.
That's
there's
okay.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
A little bit of a follow-up.
Yeah, go for it.
Answer. Mark, that was all a great presentation, as everyone's saying. So my understanding here with Jira Align is this is a completely separate app that integrates with Jira, right? It's not on top of Jira as one of the other add-ons and plugins is that we'd be purchasing, right? It's actually sign in similar to like signing into Confluence or Bitbucket or one of these other apps.
Exactly. So it is completely separate in terms of that. Like you'd have like if let's say you had it installed, it would actually be a separate URL that you're going to overall. And so that's part of the long-term journey is for us to start bringing those together to hopefully make it so that it is something where it's even lives in the same as the Atlassian Access dropdown, where all of a sudden you have that as part of your list of tools that you can go to.
I see. Thank you for this. I from the looks of it, Jira Align seems like a really strong tool, but it seems like it requires that our workflows will have to be set up a certain way for it to function correctly, right? I'm not sure if integration is going to be, I'm assuming it has to be done a certain way, right? Our workflows have to meet a certain standard.
Yeah, and so one of the things that's actually it brings up that question that Nicholas had asked too about like what might be some of the guardrails. Integration is one of those too, and so for us, as we think about workflows, we technically can take in about any workflow, though there are limitations that we'll have there in terms of that bi-directional syncing. And so we can consume any workflow, but if you want that ability to unlock the ability to update back and forth, particularly with the status, there are a couple limitations and hurdles that we'll face. Things like, we've got to be able to understand what status we need to move towards. And we can map those properly through like that Kanban that you saw. You can actually set that up to map to certain statuses on its way back out. But things like if there are additional validations along the way that pop up a modal in Jira for you to fill information out, Jira Align as a separate application can't see that through the API. And so all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't do that move. And so that's where when we work with customers, it's one of those things where you've almost got to figure out, all right, we have these validations, maybe or things in Jira. Are those things in place that were stopgaps because we didn't have a tool to help monitor those at a higher level? And if so, can we move those into Align now and essentially eliminate that? And that's typically what we see that journey going through is it's less of a plug it in and it's there and more of a, all right, we've got to really understand our ecosystem and we may need to your point, standardize on some common workflows to say this is how we want to flow work, so that way we can get that larger visibility in our organization.
Thank you so much. That's fantastic, actually. And it's actually motivating people to get their projects cleaned up, right? So they work well together.
That's actually one of the things we usually talk about when organizations start coming in. The first groups kind of go through and they get on there and people get excited and they like it. And we say, awesome, here are the requirements to come into Jira Align. And so it actually encourages teams to say, all right, I think I'd be willing to give up my custom workflow. And the Jira admin's like, oh, thank God.
I have 100 more questions, but I'll leave it to the group here.
That's all right. I know we've got Nicholas too, who's got his his presentation. So I'm actually just going to go in. I'm just going to pop one more slide up here, or two more slides up here real quick, just so y'all can see it. And then I'm going to pass it off to Nicholas. And then of course you can always reach out to me. So of course, we're on a community event. The Jira Align community is a great place to still ask questions. Even if you're new to it or you just want to learn stuff, go check it out. Many of us solutions architects, we man that and we will answer questions all the time. I think we've heard from the community team here at Atlassian that from an Atlassian involvement perspective, we're one of the most active parts of the community from a Jira Align perspective. So that's always a good place. Go check that out, ask questions, check out the discussions. It's a good time. You might see this mug around there a couple places. And then, of course, this QR code takes you to my LinkedIn profile. Feel free to connect with me and ask questions afterwards. I'm happy to answer more questions along the way. Jira Align's a cool product. Like I said, as a coach, as a Scrum Master, an RT in the past, I always struggled with finding how do I take all this manual work and stuff that I would do and get rid of it and put it into something that understood what I was trying to do. Jira Align really did that, and it helps you to really focus in on what matters from those roles. It's not reporting; it's helping the groups to get better. So connect with me, ask questions. Consider me a resource for life now. So with that said, thank you all. I appreciate it. And I'm going to go ahead and I'll hang on for the end too. And so if there are any other questions, then I'm happy to answer. So I will pass it over to Nicholas now.
Nicholas, if you'd like, I'll go ahead and give you your introduction because you've got a very friendly person in me, and I'll tell you why in a moment.
Yeah, please.
One question in chat with if Jeff from CTL Eng Tools is willing to wait till the end, we'll deal with that question then. So Nicholas, who's also in the East Coast, can get off the call if he needs to. So, people often ask me, Dan, is there just one add-on? Just one add-on? If I could have only one add-on in Jira, what would it be? Just one. Like you're on a deserted island, only one add-on. For me, it's always structure from Jira, from ALM Works. Always, 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 it's the one. There's others, but I'm really excited tonight to introduce you to Nicholas Ellis from ALM Works, who's going to talk about cross-team project management for Jira. The introduction he provided, I'll read to you just so you can hear the context. Jira offers a lot of capabilities for individual teams, which provides them the tools they need to efficiently manage their work with Kanban and Scrum boards, but it can be a little more complicated to keep things on track once you have multiple teams working together across a lot of different Jira projects. How can you stay on top of things as you grow? In this session, Nicholas Ellis from ALM Works will talk about some of the challenges associated with managing complex projects, the things you need to consider when choosing the right Jira apps, and some of the successful approaches that he's seen customers use. Nicholas, take it away.
Yeah. So let's see if this share screen button works for me. I think, yep, we got the inception view here. So yeah, you just gave me a great introduction there. This is me. And yeah, today we'll be talking about structure for Jira. I assume you guys can all see my screen, right? And hear me?
Yeah, sound good. Looks good.
Great. So yeah, when we start talking about scaling, when we start talking about getting multiple teams, we deal with a whole bunch of growing pains. And today I want to talk about all those in kind of broad strokes and different problems that we can look out for. So we'll start with like a hypothetical company profile, and then we'll kind of build out from there what we're looking at. So we always want to start off with like the current state. What are we talking about right now? How does the company look right now? How do the teams look right now? So what kind of projects are we dealing with? This could be literally the Jira projects that we're dealing with, or it could be the actual things that we're doing. What kind of interdependencies are we talking about? Then the question of scale, how many teams, how large are these teams? And then how are these teams working? I know we're often talking about Kanban and Agile and Scrum. I'm definitely a big fan of Agile and a SAFe certified SPC myself. I find those things really good ways of working. But the reality is I deal with a lot of customers who are not entirely Agile. They have some teams that are Agile and they have other teams that are working waterfall. They have this kind of like hybrid approach. We need to have, an ability to do this and that. And as everybody knows, Agile is almost always a la carte. People are going to take the parts that they like and ignore the parts that they don't. We're going to see a lot of very different ways of interpreting the same information. So then, we've got our teams, we've got the work that they're working on, we've got all that complexity. Then we've got the question of communication and, translation. How are we communicating? How is this information being radiated across teams? Do we have a single source of truth? And then from there, how are we measuring progress? What's important? We can have different teams who might have different metrics of progress, different things that are important to them, different OKRs. We can get into a lot of different complexity there, but I just kind of want to start to look at the edges of these things. And then I touched on how is planning being done. Are we dealing with different Agile methodologies? Are we dealing with different waterfall methodologies? Are we dealing with something else entirely? There's a lot of different options. Then, we can get into the kind of philosophical, epistemological, how are we defining these teams? So we can deal with teams as projects. Teams can be multiple projects, we've got to get into questions of, do we have single responsibility? Hopefully we do. It's always nice when, one issue or one team is responsible for one group of work, but that's not always the thing that we're dealing with. Sometimes there is that multiple responsibility, multiple teams having different stages of responsibility. Do we have something specific that we can point to for the team? Is it a custom field? Is it something else? And I'm sure that we've all seen that horrible situation where teams are some sort of indecipherable JQL legacy function that's just been there since before we were. So there's a lot of different ways that we can define this. And again, these could also be overlapping. There could be some kind of like mix and match. Maybe one team is team per project, and maybe another team is multi-project or components or something else. There can be a lot of overlapping different things. Then we want to define our metrics. Again, this is going to be something that needs to be done team by team. So I've definitely seen the number one the first one that I always go to is estimates. So what are we using to estimate work? Time tracking, story points, t-shirt sizing. Sometimes people are just using dates. This is when we think we're going to be done. That's kind of our estimation. We can definitely get into those status and status category flows. Is that how we're defining progress? When we move from in progress to in QA or those sorts of things. There's also those pieces of links, how much interdependent work we have. If that's not a big issue, that's great. But if it is, this is often a really big pain point and something that we want to have really, really high visibility on. And all of these, different metrics also have the underlying question, kind of the meta question of, what is our confidence in them? Do we believe that the status is correct? Do we believe that the dates are accurate? Are those targets accurate? Are these categorizations accurate? All of these things are things that we want to consider, because as much as we like to trust Jira and we like to trust the data that's in there, we need to take it with a grain of salt. We need to understand how much confidence that we have in it. So once we've got our teams defined, our metrics defined, and the work that we've want to get done, we can start to get into a specific example. So let's take some assumptions about our teams. So these are basically assumptions that I think are true most of the time. If some of these things are not true, it's probably a good thing. So I almost always deal, when I have multiple teams, with teams that are heterogeneous. I almost never deal with, we've got 10 teams and they're all exactly the same. No, it's never happened. Teams almost always are going to have interdependent work. So we're going to be looking at the dependency piece of it. If that's not a piece, that's a great win for you. We expect teams have either heterogeneous in their method of estimation or heterogeneous in their method of planning. So maybe they're agile and waterfall, maybe they're story points and time tracking. Maybe there's other elements of them that are different, but there has to be some sort of a la carte understanding that different teams need different things. We're not giving them a one size fits all solution here. Of course, teams are going to track different metrics. We talked about that, different teams having different things that are important to them. And then lastly, and this is another one that's just kind of a universal truth, is these teams are resistant to change. We don't want to come in there and say, we're going to change the way you do estimation. We're going to change the way you do this. Teams are not going to take kindly to that. So we're trying to make as small of changes as possible, with those very, very tiny pivots. We're not trying to spin the wheel and take a huge U-turn. So, Jira out of the box is great for teams. I often think of it as great for one team, highly configurable and customizable, which is really great, and provides that great foundation. But I think when we get into that multi-team projects and that higher level, we're going to get into trouble. I think Dan's estimation was right. If you're going to have one app, that one app being structure is definitely a valid approach. So if we've got this view of all these different teams, we need to decide on what the next level is. So sometimes that's project. If we do have, a team thing that we can define and group them by team, that's great. We can definitely use some of these other options, department, component. I like the higher level issue. That's actually what I'm going to be talking about with my example here. So we can have like initiatives and change requests, something above the epic or the kind of estimation level. And then if we don't have any of these things, maybe we don't have one of these things that makes sense, or maybe it's different for different teams. For one team, it's project. For the other team, it's fixed version. For another team, it's, initiative. If we need to do something arbitrary, if we need to have completely different groupings that are set up in completely different ways, we can do that with folders. So in theory, it's nice to have some sort of rule, some sort of process to be able to follow. But if we don't have that, that's not going to be a deal breaker either. So let's kind of run into an example here and look at some real stuff. So, and now I'm back to Inception mode. So here we are. Actually, sorry, I think I skipped. I really want to place for my current slide. Sorry. So I wanted to explain my structure example before I jump to it. So I kind of skipped a step there. So I think some of us know what structure is, so I'm going to kind of breeze through this. But what structure is trying to do is allow us to build hierarchies. That's kind of its bread and butter. So the simplest of those is probably, epic and then stories and then subtasks. But we can make hierarchies based on lots of different rules, lots of different attributes, and arbitrary things with folders as well. Ultimately, we want to have, a meaningful view of data in Jira at a glance. Part of this is that this data is always up to date. We never worry about structure being old or stale. It's always a live view. If somebody is updating that data right now, it is listening for those updates. So maybe you're 1 second or 5 seconds behind data, but I would never really expect you to be further than that. When we get into some serious complexity, we can get into some really, really great, extraction and calculation with the Expert language. It's basically an Excel-like programming language, but a little bit stronger and able to do a little bit more things. So we can extract some really cool data. And then if we want to get really, really fun with it, we can change the way that that's represented with color. So yeah, this full hierarchy is a really nice way to radiate information. Whether you're talking about one team or 10 teams or the whole organization, it's a really nice way of visualizing a whole lot of information. It's also a nice way of getting that buy-in. People feel like they can not just see the work in structure, but they can also edit it. They can also understand it. They also have this idea of, kind of the single source of truth. We're all looking at the same data in the same view from the same perspective. We've all got the same starting point. When we're all talking about the same data, that can really help, not necessarily to solve all problems or to, fix up everything, but it's a really nice starting point for the conversation. We can look at structure and we can say, does this make sense? Is this an accurate representation of, the real work that we're trying to do here? Whether that's tracking those risks, or understanding those data points or visualizing that timeline, all those things are valid approaches. So this is a really simple example of a formal formula here. So we can kind of mix those Agile and waterfall. So like if we have story points, we'll multiply story points by 8. So every story point is roughly 8 hours or a day, or otherwise we'll show original estimate. So this way, if one of teams got story points, one team has original estimate, we can just merge those into one column. So that way we have like a really nice view. Of course, we could do this with much more than 2, but this is just 2 different, estimation methods that we're kind of merging into a single view here. This is kind of our portfolio overview. And this is kind of the example that I'd like to get into here. So yeah, we'll just jump into the demo here. This is pretty much the view that I just had there. And this is one way that we can break down work for different teams. So we can see at the high level, I've got these top level items. So this is my core products. And then underneath my core products, I have structure, which is our actual core product. And then from here, I'm actually breaking down into my individual epics. And we can see these epics actually span multiple projects. So I've got one of the pages project, a couple in the structure project, and a couple in the Mars project. So I've got a multi-project list of epics here assigned to different people. And we can see that we're using time tracking. I've got some remaining estimates. I've got some dates down here. But if I collapse this and then we start looking at extensions, we can see that this group of work is actually completely different. We're dealing with a different project, the initiative project, as well as the testy project down here. We're dealing with a mix of story points and remaining estimates, which are a little bit weird, as well as a complete lack of dates. So, different teams using different fields, planning in different methodologies. All of these things are really not going to cause a lot of problems for structure. The limitation, kind of the difficulty I often find that people have with structure is it's not opinionated. It doesn't have an idea of what's right or what's wrong or what you're trying to do. It does no assumptions about that you're working in Agile or that you're working waterfall or anything like that. Structure is very, very explicit. It is just a blank canvas, and it wants you to tell it what to do. In order for that to work effectively, you need to be very, very explicit with what you tell it to do. So you can definitely get into more of those specifics about how we can explicitly, tell structure to do different things and to, build certain assumptions into those actions. But I think that's kind of the gist of what I wanted to talk about here today. Any questions? Yeah, I keep going to this inception view here to check if there's like a question or something. I'm sure this looks interesting on the screen there.
So you're opening up for questions now, Nicholas?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so use either the main chat, or if you figured out where the Q&A tab is, it's just, if you're in the chat.
Yeah, I see the QA tab, but
go ahead and post your questions there while you're all thinking. I'll tell you, and again, this is a community. This isn't like me. I'm not an Atlassian employee, so I can be opinionated. If somebody made me work in a Jira instance that didn't have structure and nobody was going to be willing to buy it, I'd be very disappointed, because I use it every day, literally every day when I work with teams, to be able to just quickly pull up data and structure it on the fly, no pun intended, and actually do some analysis. It's really awesome. And I brought it to my current client and the client before that and my employer before that. So I deserve
Great.
it.
I didn't realize you were such a big cheerleader for us, Dan.
Or some sort of swag or something. No, I'm kidding. But I see something coming in. Oh, it's a thank you, Nicholas. Great presentation. Let's keep it open for questions for a couple minutes more. Now, and you guys were just bought, while people are thinking about their questions, you were just bought by whom?
Yeah, so we were just bought by Tempo. So we are now part of Tempo family. And interestingly enough, Tempo had just bought before us Roadmonk. So now we're a little triumvirate of these three companies. So Roadmonk in the planning space, Tempo in the time tracking space, and then Structure is kind of the overarching kind of bringing it all together space. So I think there's going to be some synergy between those three products and hopefully some new cross integration sort of apps. Obviously we were acquired less than 30 days ago, so don't hold your breath on anything, but it's coming.
You were all based in Boston, is that right?
Yeah, so Boston is the headquarters, so that's where most of our North America staff is. We have quite a few remote employees kind of scattered about, but yeah, the majority of us are in the Boston area.
Very good. Well, certainly it's an interesting combination, those three companies. So I'll be watching with interest to see what happens. Lisa sounds like she's excited too. Any questions for Nicholas before? Oh, there's a question from Wei-Yan Wang. What kind of analysis do that rely on structure? I'm still trying to connect the dots.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. Like, what kind of analysis would I do that relies on structure, or?
Wei-Yan, do you want to add a little more context? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. My apologies. Well, while while you're thinking, I'll give you an example that I just did today with a product owner and a product manager I'm working with. Jira out of the box doesn't really let you say what's the sum of all of the story points in an epic. Simple,
Mhm.
simple question. And so I'm answering the question now daily to do some analysis. But it's very easy to do that in Jira. I mean, in structure for Jira, you can say, show me all the epics in this project, or based on a JQL query, sum up for me all of the total story points
Mhm.
for each epic and show me a progress bar. There's really no easy way to do that in Jira without doing some fancy automation where you need another add-on, but
Mhm.
that wouldn't really help you here. I do that kind of analysis all the time, or saying, what does the work really look like? How big is this backlog? Which things are started or not started? So where are things in their life cycle? So I use it that way. So there's just some examples. Nicholas, do you have any other examples that come to mind? I mean, there's thousands. You're limited only
Oh
by.
yeah, there's a lot. So just from things that I was literally working on today. I was helping one customer with a financial reporting use case that I thought was really really interesting. So we created one structure where we basically put this financial data on the epic level, and then we use that to multiply by estimation. So we basically have on the epic level said like, this is our hourly rate or our story point rate. And then we multiply our estimates by that. So we say, this thing is estimated at 1 week worth of work, which is 40 hours. And we know that we have an hourly rate of, $100 an hour. So that's $4,000 or 40,000, $4,000 to like accomplish this epic or whatever. And then, not only could we do the cost reporting, but we could also do cost overruns. We would be like, this epic was estimated at 1 week. It took 6 days worth of work. So we did an overrun by 20%. And then we could figure out what that actual cost overrun was because we knew what the labor costs for the individual teams were. Doing the calculation piece and getting into that formula piece, but also, we can add those custom fields and kind of include that data. So it was like, our financial reporting team is putting in these fields and saying, these teams are performing and costing this much per time, per story point, per, whatever metric we're dealing with. And then we could, roll that up for a lot of different financial reporting. Not just how much is this costing, but how much is this costing based on our estimation, and how much over or under we're doing on that. But yeah, I mean, anything you can do with math and programming, you could pretty much do with an expert formula. Not quite a Turing complete programming language, but I mean, pretty close.
Any other questions for Nicholas? Because I know it's getting late out there.
Yeah, well, I mean, we certainly don't have to end early on my account. I'm, got my caffeinated tea. You can keep asking questions all night.
Okay. Well, we usually try to end by 7:30-ish Pacific, but I know we usually, we started out late because of all our technical difficulties, for which we apologize. John has some very nice comments, and then Constantine has a general question for the community. In a moment, I'm going to open it up for general questions. Now, Mark, are there any other questions for Nicholas? Then we'll go back to a question left over for Mark, and then open it up to general discussion.
My last little bit is, if you have any questions or need anything, solutions at ALM Works goes right to me and my team. Yeah, I mean, we have a really good, support, and structure is not easy to use, which means I have really great job security. So, please keep the questions coming.
Great. Thank you very much, Nicholas, for a great presentation. I do see Mark with us still. Thank you for sticking around. We had this one question left over from from Jeff at CTL Eng Tools. How does Jira Align compare with advanced roadmaps for Jira? I'm sure you've heard that question before.
Yeah, I did throw an answer in there too into the. I figured out that how to answer it as well there, but I'll share it with everyone if you haven't seen it. So for us, our motto on advanced roadmaps versus Jira Aligned is that really in this case, it kind of comes down to levels of scale as well as levels of agile maturity. Advanced roadmaps is a fantastic tool to help build structure, just like Jira Aligned does, to help also give you the ability to think about how teams can potentially organize around work. But when you start having hundreds of teams coming into a single, into advanced roadmaps, trying to get that collection of data, you start coming across some limitations and even just some usability issues. And so for us, usually when you move past, a couple dozen teams, that starts asking that question of like, or actually a couple dozen even programs in that case, you start asking the question of, all right, is this the right tool for still the same job? And so for folks like who might be struggling with advanced roadmaps because of complexity, that's where Jira Align's a great option for it too. We also look at advanced roadmaps too as an option where, let's say some of those guardrails I mentioned earlier, that let's say those aren't working too well for an organization, and they like, well, we've got to have the ability to completely customize everyone's workflows, or we've got to, time isn't something that works for us. Say, awesome. We've got an option for you. And that's the goal is, from Atlassian, is less about getting you into Jira Align, but more getting you into a product that'll help you, whether it be advanced roadmaps or something like Structure, as Nicholas has talked about. Those are all awesome tools to help solve a problem that you're trying to do about rolling data up. And so that's our motto on how those things kind of live together. And I have customers that still have both. They're bringing parts of their organization that lives in a line that's rolling up a certain way, where other parts just aren't there yet. So they're living in through advanced roadmaps. And as they grow and they want to migrate in, we bring them over.
Thanks for that, Mark.
Yeah.
So let's transition, having thanked both of the presenters so many times for their really terrific presentations. Let's transition to the last part of our meeting where we have open discussion. This is where those of you who are here, who are able to either talk on audio or send in its chat message, can just ask general questions for the whole community here. And we've often just answered each other's problems live. And Randy once took me aside and helped solve a big problem I was dealing with just on a whiteboard right after the meeting. Now we can't meet in person, but we can do some of that here. So let's open that up. The first person has already raised his hand, so to speak, and that's Constantine, has a general question for the community. Go ahead, Constantine.
Hey guys, I'm not sure if you can hear me. Oh, there, I got it. I go. Okay. So this is a tough question to ask. I've been administering Jira for 10 years now, and I've worked at different companies and worked with different teams in kind of styles of administration, right? And my big question here, and I just want to, I think it's more of a question of preference, but if anyone can outline some pros and cons to like the way they do things for this, it would be really helpful to me. My question is, does anyone here have any kind of standard naming for their fields, their workflows, and the things that they're creating on the Jira side when building across projects? For example, like you might have a field called job name or something like that, and you have 5 different versions of job name that might ultimately be, one might be a drop down, another one might be an open text field. Some might be used in certain projects, other ones may not be, and you can confine it based off the settings and so on. I've seen other teams where they just simply name the fields differently. Is there any best practices here that people have come to find and any recommendations? I have no idea how to ask 20 admins this question and get a clear answer here, but I don't know, just something that came to mind here because I'm about to start kind of redefining the administration for a Jira platform, and I want to make sure that before I go forward in my style, I consider others.
That's a great question. Anyone have thoughts about that in chat or on audio?
I can try to take a stab at it first. So I don't know that there's like a nice answer. Like I don't think you're expecting like oh yeah, just do this, like problem solved. But I can definitely say I know the problem that you're trying to avoid. I've seen this done poorly a lot of times, and I've definitely dealt with that side of it. Yeah, I don't mean to dodge the question, but I think the solution that I've seen work best is less about the naming and less about actually like the fields that you build, and more about like the accompanying documentation. Like I'm more of like, we can name these things bad names, but as long as we have like good documentation to explain what they mean and what they're trying to do, that's more important than having a really good naming convention and because obviously it's great if we can have names that are understandable at a glance, and if we can have some sort of like prefix system or something to make this understandable at a higher level. But yeah, the only surefire way that I know of avoiding this problem is making sure that there's good documentation and visibility around it, which might be kind of sidestepping the question entirely, but unfortunately that's the best I got.
Nick, I definitely see the advantages in that. You know what? One thing I want to raise here, my style has actually become to name all the fields differently, right? With some prefix and so on. And I do this simply because if I have to run JQL against the fields, right, in the same JQL query,
You can avoid that disambiguation because the JQL becomes unreadable when it's like C2865 or whatever, you know.
spot on, and that's where I run into the problem the most. But I hate that that's the one thing, right? That's the one big con that's ultimately led me to do this style, because other places I see that they really do a good job of confining it to projects and so on. But what happens when you do have the fields that are cross project and so on when you're trying to run these queries and whatever you might run into? But I guess the field ID solves that problem now too. That does make sense. Anyway, all right, but yes, for sure, documentation, I think is the solve all here. So long as you have that, I think you can tell a good difference between the fields up front.
Does anybody else have a practical solution? I think we all agree that documentation is critical. Jeff is saying, don't sweat the names, document heavily.
Yeah. I don't know. That's quite the solution I'm backing, but yeah.
Anybody have a real world thing they've tried? Okay, well, thank you for the question, Constantine. It's certainly a thoughtful one and thought-provoking. Let's move on to other questions. Anybody have questions for the community? It doesn't have to be about Jira. It can be about any of the Atlassian products. Is anyone in the community, Jeff wants to know, evaluating cloud versus data center? I'd like my company to move to cloud, my client, but that's another conversation for another day. What about the rest of you? Anybody actively involved in that decision?
This is John chiming in. All of our legacy pension clients think their data is so precious that they're all at data centers and are very, very reluctant to move to the cloud. They see it as a huge threat to PII and other things like that. And it's that mentality shift that I think we try to advocate, that it's just as secure and things like that. Obviously, the availability issues that AWS just had recently don't help in being an evangelist for those types of things. But right now, it's hard. It's a hard push. The startups and the younger kind of organizations, they seem to be more open to those types of cloud types of data solutions.
I'll say that I'm trying to influence my client to move from data center to cloud. And I'll probably run into the same problems that John just mentioned. But one of my motivations is that our data center instance is really slow. Now, I don't know enough about, I've not seen data center in enough installations to know if that's just normal or if it's the way it's been set up, because I'm not a sysadmin. I can't address that. But I do know it's slow. Now, where I might be naive is I don't know if cloud's much faster. It certainly was slow years ago. And what do you all think? Is this a thing worth evaluating?
I think there's three big things. So data governance is a big one, which was kind of already covered. The other one is the scale issue. So I think some people are still kind of maybe a little on the too big side on data center to get on the cloud yet, but I think that's going away very soon. And then the third one, which is the one I'm more of an expert on, is the gap in apps. So I know the gap for structure is pretty small right now. There are some minor pain points, but I would expect by the end of this year, you would hardly even notice it. There would be no features of significance that were different, and it would be kind of one-on-one. But different apps are different in there. So if you're on data center and there's some apps that are really important to you that either aren't ported over to cloud or don't have the same functionality, that can be really, really business critical. But those are the three big hurdles that I see. But again, this is me talking to customers. I'm not, our company isn't dealing with this migration ourselves. So,
Lisa, you came off mute, but I can see your mouth moving, but I don't hear you.
This is why everyone in the world needs to know sign language for this exact problem.
Wish I knew it. No, still no audio, Lisa.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
there we go, Lisa.
Yay, success. Yeah, so also, I mean, I've done a few migrations myself as well in my previous Atlassian world, but the apps is definitely a huge hurdle. And it really does give companies the opportunity to take a step back and go, do we really need all of these apps? Or can we consolidate and work a lot smarter? It also gives you the opportunity to clean up. Do you really need all of this stuff over here? And I think it's really in a lot of the clients that I've been speaking to, they've really embraced that. Well, some not really, but the ones who want to, they're wanting to move to cloud. They've really embraced that because they realize that they've had all of this baggage in their current instance for so long that it's become this huge monolith that they don't really need. And it gives them the opportunity to scale down and really hone in on what they really need. And I think that data center and cloud has its merits. Depending on what you want, you need to come up with what is it you're looking for before just jumping to, okay, we need to move to cloud, because there is a lot of homework that goes into it. And for those companies who say, I want to bring everything, they better have a big checkbook, because it's expensive. It's really expensive. And so, taking that step back and just thinking about, do we really need this or not, could save down the road.
Lisa, do you mean licensing is expensive, or do you mean the consulting fees you're going to have to pay to get help to move?
The professional services. And when I say expensive, it's not. It maybe you don't go with the company that does it for you. It's expensive internally as well, because it now takes you away from your day-to-day job to actually do this migration work, rather than putting the effort into try and clean up, get those standards into place, and then get the executive buy-in and or stakeholders to say, we really don't need these apps going forward.
Yeah, great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else can actively? Here's what Jeff said in response. Thanks for the feedback. The shift to cloud seemed to me, at least, to be mostly cultural and less technological. I think there is a lot of technological work. Yeah, I think you're right. But from what I know about migrations, there's a lot of pre-planning and a lot of data problems that you run into. I see Mark Siegel nodding his head. I know he has a lot of experience in doing some of these migrations that I don't have. So there is a huge technological challenge, and what I don't know how to evaluate is what are the benefits once you've moved to cloud. Can it handle, like, my client's 15,000 user data center license? Is that going to work real hummingly fast in cloud?
Yeah, it's pretty fast.
Okay.
Performance is improved a lot from when cloud first came about. It's a lot more zippy. Where it struggles is where you have these sort of BI type add-ons, such as Easy BI. If you're pulling really large data sets using Tempo timesheets, it struggles a little bit. But when you move up to sort of premium and enterprise packages, you tend to have a little bit more speed. But the day-to-day, just kind of working through Jira and Confluence, it's fine. There are limitations, and you need to do your homework, because it's not a like for like. So if you've been on data center or server for 5-10 years, it's quite different. The user interface is quite different. But I have to say, I prefer cloud now, and just because I'm used to it, and change is change for everybody. It's hard. And so initially you go into a new product or a new thing and you're like, oh, I don't like it, because you're not used to it. And after a while, you start to learn to live without the things that were there before. And it feels just lighter and less cluttered, I guess.
Thanks for that.
I haven't used cloud in a long time, but one of the things, and I'm asking if this has changed, is no control over the update rollout. So sometimes, I have customers call and say, well, how come this is different now? And we had no clue. We didn't update, add-ons or whatever. Do they allow you to control the rollouts now?
Yeah, they have release tracks now where
Okay.
you as the admin can put in a time frame. There's a little configuration in the back end where you can say, don't roll out this release or roll this release out every X time, and then you can send out a comms to everyone. They've also one of the huge bone of contention was the banner. The announcement banner wasn't there. So for admins everywhere, they were like, how am I supposed to communicate to my users that we're doing something? Anyways, long story short, September last year they rolled it out. So now we've got the banner in there. It's not sexy, but it's there. And at least you can then notify your users of some updates that are coming. So
Great. Thank you.
Thanks. We're pretty much at time, a little beyond where I'd like to end the meeting, again, so people can get some sleep or dinner or whatever it is they do at this time of night. Are there any pressing questions that you've just been dying to ask the community? Anyone?
I got a million, but I hate wasting the team's time. I'll throw this one out there. Last question, real quick. I'm on an older version of Jira, and I noticed there's a new feature that's been rolled out in the last couple of years here where you can have the users add members to their own team. So more or less, rather than giving them site administration, so they have to go in and make their own groups and then have those things tagged on issues. Now you've given users, or at least project managers, I believe, the capability of creating their own teams and managing those in Jira and then attributing those to issues. Has anyone run into any difficulty with that? Is it a great new feature? I don't know. I'm just looking for any warnings before I get hands-on with this new feature that I haven't used before.
I can speak to that one. Team managed projects, they can be good or bad. You can have sprawl happen if you leave it unchecked. I think by default, Jira sets it up where everyone can create it. Even if they have a license on that instance, they can create team managed projects. And you just got to take it for what you get. I mean, if you're on a lesser tier licensing, you got to be concerned about what kind of they're going crazy with attachments and things, or where you might hit your limits, or they've gone crazy with some automations and you're wondering why you keep getting throttled. You gotta have all that kind of stuff that's going unchecked as a Jira admin. So typically I'm actually looking at the possibility of killing it on the current instance I'm working with because it causes some trouble, but it does have its merit in smaller organizations where you want to empower your users and maybe they're not going to be doing anything over the top.
Cool.
Two things to just think about is, number one, it's going to be difficult to do cross-project reporting if you allow users to go and set up whatever they want because you're down to custom fields, etc. And then the other thing is a global setting in the back end where you can set up your groups for sort of power users to allow those people only to create those team managed projects, or you as the admin create it first and then give the rights over to somebody in that team to take responsibility. A couple options.
I love
there.
that. Thank you.
Okay. Great discussion today. Terrific presentations. Very glad to be back, so to speak. And I'll tell you a little preview that our next meeting, we're actively working on scheduling it for February 15th. What a great way to celebrate Valentine's Day one day late. But February 15th, right now we have one company preparing to speak. It's AppFire. Some of you know, they're pretty well-known workplace app developers. And they're going to be speaking about workflow and automation, which is something their company addresses. They'll be talking about typical problems and how to address them using their tools. So what we hopefully will have a second speaker. One note for all of you is ideally this community has community speakers. People here in the community come and share your ways of dealing with things, the problems you run into, nifty solutions you've made up. So just a reminder, as I do every meeting, think about whether you'd like to present here. We've had a bunch of our own members present in the past, and it's always a great experience. So we'd like to mix it up. So if you want to know more, just email any of us through the ace.atlassian.com website, and we will get back to you. Any final thoughts, Mark? Anyone else?
Yeah,
Jen?
I just wanted to add to that as well that we're also, trying to kick this back into a monthly routine. If you've got ideas of things you want to hear, maybe you might not want to be the speaker on it, but maybe you'd like somebody to speak on it while we're in this virtual state, it's really cool that we have some access to these great Atlassian resources. So it doesn't have to be Jira. Obviously, it's all Atlassian. So it's Confluence, or you want to know something more DevOps or something like that. Again, email us on that as well. We'd love to get ideas and keep the topics fresh and relevant as we continue to go through the journey.
Thanks, Mark. Any other final comments? Okay, then thank you again, everyone, for attending, and Happy New Year to you all, and we'll see you in February on the 15th.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.